Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to week number 4 of the course. It's kind of surprising that we're almost to the halfway point already. It's gone by very quickly, but this is your week 4 video. Again, last week in week 3, we looked at position classification. We talked about job analysis, evaluation. We talked about placing positions in a classification system then for the primary purpose of assigning compensation. So we could have equal pay for equal work, to make sure that each one of our positions will be compensated accordingly relative to the supervisory responsibilities or the skills required of other positions within our organization. You also, in some of your assignments, talked about the idea of compensation and the relationship between compensation levels and the relationship between individuals and their organizations, and what compensation levels do for that relationship, either building trust in that relationship or sometimes actually eroding that trust in the relationship where people see inequities in terms of the compensation that they are receiving. So moving on from position management, classification, compensation from week 3 here into week 4. Here in week 4, we're going to look more at motivation, and with a special attention paid to how our motivational strategies may change depending upon the types of employees that we are trying to motivate. Now, for this week, you will reread probably, because you've probably been exposed to these theories before, but you'll reread some motivational theories from the classical and the human relations school of organization theory. You have Mary Parker Follett's work assigned this week, and we've already talked in the past about Mary Parker Follett, her approach to democratic organizations, how she sees running an organization to be somewhat akin to running a democracy, and how one of our goals in organizations to motivate our employees is to get them to participate in their own governance. As you will see from Follett's work, she was very concerned about what she called the power with as opposed to the power over relationship. She did not see power as something to be given, but rather she saw it as a resource to be developed on the part of our employees. And so this self-governance, this participatory type of approach to leadership all had an impact upon motivating employees. You also read about Douglas McGregor. If you haven't read about Douglas McGregor before, his Theory X versus Theory Y approach to organizations. McGregor basically comes to the conclusion that the majority of our employees are Theory Y employees. They tend to be creative, they tend to be intelligent, they tend to seek out responsibility and authority. Those are your Theory Y types of employees, and that really describes for McGregor the majority of the workforce. Unfortunately, we have these Theory Y employees who are essentially shoehorned into Theory X organizations. So these classical organizations we've talked about before that have rigid classification schedules, that have rigid adherence to policies and procedures and rules and guidelines, those Theory X types of organizations tend to inhibit the personal growth of Theory Y employees, which then leads to a great deal of frustration, which then has an adverse impact upon motivating those employees. So we'll talk about McGregor. You can incorporate McGregor into some of your writing for this week in terms of what happens when Theory Y employees are forced into Theory X organizations and what that then means for motivation. McGregor, Chris Argyris, others who wrote in that vein, all believed that it was incumbent upon the organization to change to better meet the needs of Theory Y employees. So a Theory X organization had to change, to transform more into a Theory Y organization to meet the needs of Theory Y employees to better motivate those employees. And so things such as job enlargement and job enrichment, where we allow employees to participate in redesigning their positions so that they can acquire the types of skills and the types of responsibilities that they want and that they feel they need that will help them enhance their personal growth. So it's not so much asking what can the organization get out of the employee, but we're turning around and also asking, what can individuals get out of their organizations? Maslow, who has had a very big influence on Douglas McGregor. You're familiar with Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We will cover that hierarchy of needs again this week in terms of motivation. As you know, the bottom 4 levels in the hierarchy of needs, those are deficiency types of needs, that people are motivated by a deficiency in these things such as physiological needs or safety needs. Those are all motivators when it comes to filling a deficiency. But once that deficiency has then been satisfied, they then cease to be motivators. The only one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that continues to serve as a motivator will be self-actualization at the apex of that hierarchy of needs pyramid. Once you get to self-actualization, this desire for personal growth, this desire to, quote unquote, be all that you can be, that continues on because that's a growth motivator. And so people will always strive for personal growth. That's something that is never fully extinguished. That's something that's never fully satisfied and will continue on as a motivator for employees. You'll talk about people like Vroom this week and Vroom's expectancy theory, where Vroom looked at motivation as a series of expectancies and looked at the probability, the likelihood that a certain level of effort would lead to a certain level of performance. And then if you achieve that certain level of performance, what is then the likelihood that that level of performance will then result in an outcome? And then what is the value that the employee places upon that outcome? So essentially in Vroom's expectancy theory, he argues that you have to look at the confidence on the part of the employee, that if they put forth additional effort, that additional effort will then lead to a desired level of performance. So if that person comes in and works on that weekend, that level of effort coming in working on that weekend will then allow them to complete this report that they want to try and complete, or that their manager wants them to complete. So what's the likelihood that that level of effort will lead to that level of performance? Is the employee 10% confident that that will happen? Are they 50% confident? Are they 90% confident? And then if they achieve that level of performance, what then is the likelihood that that level of performance will then result in a desired outcome? So if they do get that report done at the end of the weekend, well, what outcome is then attached to it? Is the outcome going to be that they get praise from a supervisor? Will they be employee of the week? Will they get some type of perk because they got that report done? They achieved that level of performance. So what's the likelihood that that outcome will occur if that level of performance has been reached? In Vroom's expectancy theory, that likelihood that the outcome will occur for a certain performance level is what's known as instrumentality. That instrumentality speaks to how confident is the employee that the supervisor, the leader, will provide the outcome once that performance level has been met. And then for that outcome, that perk or the reward that's being given, how much does the employee value that reward? That's what's known as the valence level. And so if an employee places a very high value, a very high valence level on that outcome, they're going to be more motivated to try and achieve that outcome. And so Vroom puts together this formula that we can use to predict the motivational level of our employees. Now, the limitation on Vroom, obviously, is that employees don't go through these calculations. Employees don't say, well, I'm 40% sure that my effort will lead to performance, multiply it by 30%, 0.30 sure that the level of performance will lead to a certain level of outcome. They obviously don't go through those machinations, but what they will do is on a more qualitative level, they will take all of those factors into consideration, and all those factors will then contribute to the motivation of the employee. Also in motivation, since we are talking about the public sector, we will also look at internal versus external motivators, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivating. And as we know, public employees tend to be much more in line with intrinsic motivators as opposed to extrinsic motivators. We are very limited in the public sector in the extrinsic motivators that we can use. We don't have a lot of extrinsic rewards that we can give to our employees, so they are motivated predominantly by the more intrinsic types of motivators. So this week really looks at motivation, engaging our employees, really promoting more productivity among our employees by trying to provide them with the motivators that will make them more productive employees. A really important aspect of this week, and a really fascinating aspect of this week, is when we then apply motivational theories to different types of employees. And there's a generational component here that's very big for this week. So do these motivators that work for baby boomers, are those the same motivators that might work for Generation Xers? And do the motivators that work for Generation Xers, do those work for millennials? And do the motivators that work for millennials, will those eventually work for Generation Z employees? And so our different generations, different types of employees, motivated by different types of incentives. And just like everything else in managing personnel and really running our organizations, again, I think the best answer is it depends. It tends to be very contextual. It tends to be very much based upon the situation and the individuals that you are dealing with at that particular point in time. So I think it's very true that millennials are probably motivated by different types of things than Generation Xers. And you get the opportunity to explore those types of issues with your assignments for the week. So keeping with the theme that we have had in previous weeks, for this week, you have two primary assignments. You have your multimedia discussion board assignment, just like you've had in the previous 3 weeks. In this multimedia discussion board assignment, you're going to again create a very brief recorded presentation that is narrated, in which you tell me which generation you feel that you are in based upon when you were born. And then tell me, do you identify with the characteristics of that generation? So in the information we cover this week, you'll see that each generation, there are different characteristics for each generation. So do you feel that you are in line with some of those characteristics? Do you feel that those characteristics fit you? So the first part of your presentation will be about you and how well you think you fit the characteristics of your generation. Then I want you to select a friend, family member, coworker who is from a different generation and analyze how well that person fits the characteristics of that generation. And then the third part of your presentation, I want you to talk about, from the perspective of a supervisor, how might that supervisor develop unique management strategies to manage people from those different generations. And so there are unique management strategies that would work for a Gen Xer as opposed to a millennial, or is it more of a one-size-fits-all type of an approach that we can come up with a panacea, a cure-all approach to the way in which we manage everyone, irrespective of what generation they are from? And as always, as you produce this video, I do hope that you will incorporate some of the theorists that we cover this week. So where McGregor fits, or Maslow fits, or Follett fits, or Vroom fits, that you will illustrate those theories within your brief multimedia presentation. So you've got your multimedia discussion board. Then you also have another written assignment for this week. This written assignment is a pretty straightforward type of assignment. In the first paragraph, you're going to present to me 3 themes in that first paragraph. And by themes, we're looking at different theories. And so you could present to me different motivational theories. And so you're going to discuss McGregor's theory X versus theory Y, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Vroom's expectancy theory. So lay out for me 3 different theories or theorists that you're going to be discussing in your written assignment. Then give me a paragraph on each one of those theories, talking about how those theories affect employee motivation. So one on McGregor, one on Maslow, one on Vroom, and then a concluding paragraph. So this is a very brief assignment. Again, We are looking at really about 2 to 3 pages. We're not looking for a whole lot of elaboration. But what we are looking at is I'm looking for you to identify 3 different theories and then give me some examples of what each one of those theories then means for the motivation of employees. And so if you can pull examples from your current organization, obviously that's the gold standard, that's the ideal, that's really what we're looking for. So hopefully in each one of your 3 supporting paragraphs, you'll have at least one example of how you see McGregor's theory, theory Y, being used to motivate employees, or how you see, at least from a more subjective, qualitative perspective, how you kind of see Vroom's theory at work in terms of motivation within your organization. So always try to endeavor to include at least one example in each one of those paragraphs where you talk about each of the 3 different theories. But again, very brief, 2 to 3 pages. Same grading rubric applies to this one as has applied to the previous 3 assignments. So I think you probably have a pretty good handle on that. Make sure you proofread it. Make sure it is devoid of typographical or grammatical errors. Make sure that at least comes close to adhering to APA format. So multimedia discussion board posting this week, as well as a very brief written assignment looking at motivation and the theories of motivation that we are talking about this week, with an eye on how those theories of motivation may work better or worse for different types of employees from different types of generations. So that's about it for week number 4. As always, if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to send me an email. Hope everyone enjoys their Memorial Day weekend, and I look forward to reading your assignments. So have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions at all.